Hello, everyone. You are listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. I am Jordan Hall, and as always, I am joined by the dynamic Joe Fordyce. Joe, the Flyers had a busy stretch of 3 games in 4 days. They won 2 of those games, and it all started with the Cutter Gauthier game. That was quite an environment last Saturday night at the Wells Fargo Center. The fans, of course, were all over Gauthier, and the team rolled. It won 6-0. And Joe, they really needed a win. That was what made the game even more meaningful for the Flyers, was not just allowing their fans to give it to Cutter Gauthier, but they needed the win. And it almost felt like, could this be a galvanizing type of moment for the Flyers? Could this be a moment that gets them back on track and making this season more interesting? Did it feel like that to you?
It did. I will say, though, it didn't feel that way during the first period of the Florida game.
Yeah.
Because naturally, after all that emotions in the building against Anaheim, they win 6-0. 2 days later, you're coming back, you're playing the Stanley Cup champs, but the building isn't going to be as excited. And they come out in the first period, give up 2. It looked like a letdown. That's what it looked like. And the fact that they were able to come back against that team, their top goalie, who was playing well in that game, and they still managed to get, to score goals against him, and win that game against them, to me was, it sounds weird to say, the most impressive part of the Ducks win was the fact that they were able to follow it up with a win against a really good Panthers team, because beating the Ducks 6-0, okay, Anaheim's not a great team. Quite frankly, it would have been really concerning if they had lost to the Ducks, because, as you said, they needed a win. So I think that the follow-up was the most impressive thing. And I feel like what happened then is all of that caught up to them late last night in the third and overtime with Columbus. But again, to me, the payoff for that effort Saturday didn't come from me until the second and third period against Florida. Because to me, if you're going to go out and you're going to go out and blow out the Ducks, and then you're going to come out and get smoked on your home ice against the Stanley Cup champs, the win against the Ducks doesn't really matter that much. That made it matter. So that was my takeaway.
I couldn't agree more. It made that Florida game that much more important, because if they lose to the Panthers, if they have a letdown, they almost did, really, it just almost renders what they did against the Ducks kind of meaningless, because it would be the same thing the Flyers have been doing. Win a game, lose a game, lose 3 straight,
Right.
Win 3 straight. They had to build on it, and they did with that comeback. They came back to beat Florida, and that was huge.
And the sort of external stuff that was going on in that Ducks game, if you go out and you lose to Florida, all of a sudden it feels like you need this extra stuff to get you up for a game, which John Tortorella was obviously trying to get that message across after the Ducks game. Mm-hmm. He seemed downright annoyed that all the noise around the game that didn't really have to do with anything but a scorned fan base, perhaps a player that came, I don't know Cutter Gauthier, so I'm going to say a player that came off as maybe a little bit spoiled and kind of pushed his way out of town by essentially ghosting the Flyers front office. It kind of came together as a angry Saturday night crowd that was out for blood. And quite frankly, it was almost as if everything that Danny and Jonesy said last year kind of sanctioned almost what happened here Saturday night. They said basically he didn't want to be here, so kind of do with him what you will. And the win against Florida showed that, okay, maybe we don't need all that. because there's not a lot of, there's not this pre-infused energy and sort of emotion and hostility, although the Flyers said there wasn't any of that Saturday. There wasn't any of that with the Florida game. So the fact that they were able to, now it wasn't great that they started slow, but the fact that they were able to rebound within that game against a good team, I don't know. To me, that negates all that extra stuff. And I think that was a big thing for John Tortorella, clearly. And I think it was a big thing for the team overall. Because again, you go then and you get a win against one of the top teams in the league. Without all this other juice. And I mean, quite frankly, I didn't think the building was pretty dead at the beginning of that Florida game. And coming off an Anaheim game, I expected that. And I thought the first period kind of showed that, and it was a little worrisome, but then they kind of made all that go away.
The Ducks game, there was that built-in storyline already with Cutter Gauthier, so the fans were into it. That was probably the most riled up I've seen them in years. I'm thinking of a couple of times in my time covering the team when it was that rowdy was probably the 2018 playoffs against the Penguins, Sean Couturier's effort in Game 6. And then also 2019-20, they had a game against the Rangers right before Christmas where they were really starting to gain steam under Alain Vigneault, and the building was really alive. This felt like almost like a soccer atmosphere, Joe, with the chanting. But a subplot to me was maybe the Flyers got a taste of what it's like when Philadelphia is really into the team that's playing on the ice and there's playoff hockey at stake. When big things happen at the Wells Fargo Center, that's what it's like. And I think that can be a really good thing for some of the younger players, that if you guys get it right and you build it right, the fans come and they matter. And like this matters. What they're doing matters, because Joe, there has been times where the building is a little dead at times and there's not much energy, but when they're coming back to beat Florida and then they have a guy like Cutter Gauthier in town and they have a meaningful game like that, the building's alive and it's fun. And I think the Flyers can use that moving forward.
Yeah, and John Tortorella kind of downplayed that question when he was asked that Saturday night. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. No. Saying that, he hopes that the crowd gets this way for what you mentioned, a playoff game or something of the sort, which they will. But the young players on this team haven't seen that. So this is the closest they've gotten so far. So I do think that was good. And all of them talked about that after the game. So I thought that was a huge deal for them to see that. And to me, I was a little taken back with how angry Tortorella seemed about that whole thing, because to me, it would have been concerning after everything that happened last year if the fans didn't turn out like that and do that, because excuse me, it shows that they care.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I agree. I think that's typical John Tortorella after a huge win where it's 6. And same thing when they lose really badly and you think he's going to freak out, and he keeps it together and he backs his team. It's kind of what John Tortorella does. But that was a great win for the Flyers. They were able to build on it, and the atmosphere was electric. I don't think anyone's going to complain about that.
Well, one guy.
One guy
complained about it.
The Road to Victory bus tour is back Friday, January 17th. Come celebrate the Birds with exclusive swag and special guests, plus a chance to win tickets to a playoff game. The event is presented by Ticketmaster. Go to NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com for the full schedule. Joe, you did mention the tough shootout loss, the most recent game for the Flyers, a shootout loss. I thought the Flyers had a really commendable effort. Second night of a back-to-back. They're coming off 2 emotional wins, and they get the Blue Jackets all the way down to a shootout. They had a chance to nail down a third-period lead. They didn't. But to me, the overarching theme was that there was positives there in that game. They have struggled in the second night to back-to-backs, Joe, but again, I really thought they've now pieced together 3 positive performances in a row, and we've needed to see more of that. It's just been too up and down, you don't know too much. You don't know what's going to happen one night, followed by the next. Now I think they've had 3 really productive games where I think they've played their style, and they can build on that, Joe. Time will tell if they do, but what did you think of these 3 games and how they've played?
I thought the three overall, you have to take away a positive. In terms of the Columbus game, second game of back-to-back, and you're sort of getting a buzzsaw. Columbus is one of the hotter teams in the league right
Yeah.
now. They're in a playoff spot, which if you're casually paying attention, you probably didn't realize because they were nowhere near that the last time the Flyers played them. And they ran into Zach Werenski, who's just having a career season.
Mhm.
And he was on a heater last night. And that's what happens. It's going to happen. You're going to run into teams that are hot. And the thing with the Flyers right now is a lot of the teams coming up on their schedule are just that. Because the teams that were playing bad before are now playing better. The Detroits, the Columbuses, the Rangers even. They're playing better. Those are the teams coming up on the schedule. So, and there's so much parity within the standings that it matters to take that game to overtime and get a point. Because you're not always going to be at your best. And if you can take a red hot team to overtime and get a point against them on the road on the second night of a back-to-back, you have to take it and be happy with it when you consider what happened the first night of the back-to-back and the game before that. So now, if last night happens and they didn't win against Florida or they lost to the Ducks, it's a different story. But what was in front of them last night was sort of a buzzsaw, and the Flyers still managed to get a point. So I think you have to take that as a positive.
I agree. The night before, then they have to travel to the point where I think there was a real concern that they would have a massive letdown. And that would have been disappointing, even considering the circumstances of them playing second game of back-to-back, coming off a good win. You still wanted to see them build off of what they did. And I thought in large part they did. They didn't get the final result. They lose in a skills competition, but they had a lead in the third period. They get a really positive performance from Ivan Fedotov. We've never known exactly what to expect with the backup goalie or really just the goaltending in general. They get Fedotov giving them a really good performance. So I think there's a lot to like there for the Flyers over these last 3 games. Their goal prevention's been better. We've seen their offense. The power play's been ignited a little bit. Now it's about, again, piecing it together, like putting together 5-game segments, 10-game segments. You're not going to win every game, but try to play that way as much as you can, sustain it. And we just have not seen that. But when you get a real positive stretch of 3 games, I think the Flyers can hang their hat on that a little bit and understand like they're trending in a better direction.
Yeah, and I think when you look at this 2-week segment right now where they have 7 games over the 2 weeks, and they're all against teams that are around, aside from the Ducks game, but if you starting with Sunday and the back-to-backs Monday and Tuesday, they have a bunch of games against teams that are, I mean, the Devils are really good, but that are around them in the standings. Yeah. So you have a challenge when you talk about those segments. This is a big segment, and there's going to be more of these in January because the schedule gets condensed leading into the Four Nations face-off. And to me, the biggest takeaway from that Columbus game may have been Ivan Fedotov because to me, by the third period last night, you felt confident he was going to make a save. He was going to be there to make a save. I think it's been a while since that's been the case with a backup goalie, whether it be Fedotov or Alexei Kolosov. So I think Fedotov is, for now, taking back the backup role. And I'm just going to go by John Tortorella's answer to you after Monday night's game about enough's enough with the goaltending. They have to be better. And that night and the following night, their starter and their backup both played significantly better than they had in their previous games. I mean, not including the Ducks game, but, overall. Yeah. So I really think that was a huge takeaway. Liked how you channeled your inner Alain Vigneault there with the losing the skills competition.
Yes.
That was his favorite line about shootout
Yes.
losses. They had plenty of them when he was here, and he would always call them skills competition.
That is tremendous. I do remember him saying that a lot.
Yeah.
That's so funny. That's probably what put it in my brain
Yeah.
to begin with.
Yeah.
Good times. Get fired up for the playoffs with our Eagles live Q&A on Friday, January 17th. Join our Eagles experts in person or virtually as they answer all your biggest Birds questions. Our Q&A is presented by Toyota, the proud automotive partner of the NFL. Joe, something that's been an interesting storyline to develop over these 3 games is Joel Farabee being a healthy scratch for all 3. He ended his Ironman streak at 216 games when John Tortorella decided to make him a healthy scratch for the Anaheim game. And I think just what happens is when a team plays as well as it did, as the Flyers did in those 2 games, you keep the same lineup. And Farabee's just been the odd man out now, and he's kind of had to wait his turn. We'll see if he eventually draws back in after the Flyers lost to Columbus. But the Flyers have had 3 pretty good performances, and he's had to sit. Where do you think this all goes? Do you think this will be beneficial for Farabee moving forward?
That is hard to say because I feel like he's a guy that's sometimes hard coaching goes positive, sometimes it goes negative. We saw this happen with Mishkov. He got benched, they played well, and he was benched the next game. It's almost like you're not gonna, if you're in a casino and you're winning money on a slot machine and you keep winning on that machine, you're not going to switch to another machine. So what, but there comes a point where, I mean, Lixell's in the lineup. It's not like he's been tremendously noticeable in these games. You probably got to get Farabee back in there. And I would think the Islanders game would be the time. 3 games, I think, is a message. And I think 3 games is around where we've seen John Tortorella handle other situations like this at around the 2 or 3 game mark. I mean, you certainly don't see him sitting him for 5 or 6 games. At least I don't, because he hasn't. If he sits a guy for that long, generally he was going to come out and say the reason. He hasn't really said anything about, other than that he needed a reset. He hasn't really pointed out anything specific. So I think he'll be back in there later this week. If not the Islanders game, then the Devils game Saturday. But I do think it's a question about where it's going. Because to me, this is a season where Joel Farabee's been struggling to score, and then his name comes up in the trade rumors. And that's a lot of, he didn't get to play in the Cutter Gauthier game. He was one of those Flyers that was supposed to be around, those draft picks from those years were this team that's going to be the team going forward. And now you wonder, is that the case? Or are they going to try to trade him? But what I can tell you is sitting him on the bench is not any way to increase his trade value, which is where we talked about this before with John Tortorella. He talks a lot about the future and the plans and the kind of seeing this through. And this is the only place I see him sort of deviate from that thinking, because it doesn't help when you're benching guys. I mean, unless you want to get less value from them, if you're still going to just trade it. But Farabee is not a guy they should be in the market for taking anything for. So if, regardless of your plans, you either need Farabee in the lineup to help offensively, or you need him in the lineup to increase his trade value. Either way, it can't go on much longer.
I agree. I think it would make sense to get him back in coming up here, especially just for fresh legs. They just went through a pretty tough stretch of 3 and 4, and Farabee's a young kid. It's going to be re-energized, I think, with fresh legs. It gives him a great chance to come in and, give them somewhat of a spark just from an energy standpoint. And it will very much be a critical stretch moving forward here going into March. Of course, when the trade deadline comes around, how much buzz will there be about Farabee's name? How will he be playing come that time? Will the Flyers feel like he's at his peak value? But by no means are the Flyers giving up on him. John Tortorella even said it, and I believe him. There's still a ton of value with Joel Farabee. He's 24. He had a great year last year, even though he dipped down the stretch. I just think there's so much more value than what we're seeing if you look at his numbers. And it could take some time, but I do think it's been a mental struggle with him. Not that he's inside his own head, but just there's been so much noise about him. The points weren't coming when he was playing well. I'm sure that eventually wears on you when you feel like you're playing well, but you're not getting the production. So I just think it's been a lot on him. But I think he can come out of it. And I certainly think he can play better than what he has. And Tortorella even alluded to that. It had gotten stale recently, but even when he was playing on the first line, the numbers weren't all the way there, but he had liked the way he was playing. But recently, I would agree. I think the healthy scratch was warranted. I think the Flyers had given him time. They were working with him, and it just got to a point where he was on the fourth line, and I think they needed to look at someone else. But I believe Farabee can help them eventually, and I think it'll come soon. I do think, coming off a loss, that's not a bad time to get another guy in, especially some fresh legs.
Yeah, and this is the guy that's dealt with adversity before, the injury a
Mhm.
few years ago where he had the neck surgery, and he's gone through some adversity before, so it's not like he hasn't dealt with some things that could potentially derail his game.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I think he will bounce back.
And I think the Flyers will have perspective here. Again, it's such a everyday business. What have you done for me lately? Thing. I even look at the evaluation game to game. But like you said, Joe, you keep a lineup the same because of the previous game. So, but I think big picture, they're not going to lose sight of what Farabee's done. What could he possibly help them do in the future? But definitely a critical point, I think, in Farabee's Flyers career of trying to solidify his spot, or we'll see if his future is elsewhere. Definitely something to monitor when he eventually does come back in. Like, how many minutes is he playing? Is he producing?
What line's he on? Who's
What
he
line is
playing
he
with?
on?
Because
Right.
there's some chemistry with some of these lines right now, so it'll be interesting to see where he comes back into the lineup.
Yeah, and they've had wingers come up through the system. Matvei Mishkov being one, where maybe Mishkov just naturally has stolen some minutes from him because he's a winger, and each and every year of a rebuild, you get younger players coming up and starting to fight for roles. So we'll see where it all goes with Farabee, but something certainly to monitor moving forward. Joe, great to see you. Great to chat with you. Thanks so much for doing this. Looking forward to the games coming up here on NBC Sports Philadelphia and NBC Sports Philadelphia Plus. Flyers Pre and Post Game Live produced by our very own Joe Fordyce. A big thank you to Ben Berry, our podcast producer and guru. And as always, Flyers fans, thank you so much for listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, please rate and listen. And we cannot wait to talk to you next time.